I kind of want to answer a question that I kept getting from friends and family over the last few days. And that was an interpretation of the president's Truth Social feed, which many people don't see on Truth Social, but see it perhaps on X, or they see it reposted on Instagram. I mean, it is interesting how this works now. And of course, you've heard me get into the mistake collectively the world made in its attempt to try to deplatform Donald Trump after January 6th. By the way, my what if episode is coming later this week and early next week. You're going to get a couple of my what ifs, including what if Donald Trump had won the 2020 election. But before, I don't want to give away too much of the store on that. Um, but ever since, right, Truth Social has been his primary way to communicate. And people on X reposted, people on Instagram reposted, gets reposted on TikTok, all the other social media platforms. And being the president of the United States, you know, I do think there are things that don't get reposted that if people saw them more intently, they would be even more troubled by the psyche of this president. But kept getting a question about one specific thing he tweeted or truthed, however you want to call it. And that is when he was tweeting about like just his anger over Epstein, which clearly anything that makes him look bad, he gets angry about, and sort of the grievance comes out, the victimization, and let's make other people pay the price before he has to pay the price, right? He called for and said this, and it was something like, this may be your last Merry Christmas, you know. And I had a lot of people go, what does he mean by that? Seeing it as a threat, seeing it as, what is it? And, look, I will fully confess that I ignore most of his, I see them, I ignore most of them because I don't believe he means anything. This is, to me, think about the time period with which we get most of these. We get them at after 10 o'clock at night, sometimes at 3 or 4 in the morning, East Coast time. And I think we all think about the person in your life that you notice is on social media a lot at odd hours. These are people that have some form of anxiety. Perhaps they're super lonely. Maybe things aren't going well at home. And that's what I always come back to. When you have the president doing this on Christmas Day, on Christmas Eve night, going all through this, and you're asking yourself, oh my God, what is wrong with this man? And I look at it as this is a cry for help. This guy is lonely. He really doesn't have anybody he's close with. It is, I know this will come across sounding like a hater, but he doesn't, he is, he is close with his kids because he's supposed to be. But if you've done reporting about his actual personal relationships with his kids, you will know they're not great. There isn't, it is a one-way relationship, and that's been the problem. All of his relationships are one way. He uses people, he discards them, which may explain why you never hear things like former college roommate of Donald Trump stopped by Mar-a-Lago to hang out with him. A friend that he grew up with has been, show it doesn't happen. There are no old friends. He has old acquaintances that he discards or uses whenever he deems necessary, right? Jeffrey Epstein is probably the best version of this. Here was somebody he was quite close to. And then he drops him like a rock when he starts, and this is what he does he is not going to be a friend when you're in trouble. He expects you to be a friend, though, when he's in trouble. And I think it explains why that on a day like Christmas Day, when most of us, the last thing we're going to be doing is behaving lonely on the internet, he does. And it is, most people ignore it. Most people don't see it. I do view it as some sort of, personal cry for help, which is why I very much think that his social issues really are a part of sort of the lack of character that he has to be leader of the free world. But that's not where I want to focus that conversation, because what I really want to, there is something else that we learned via his feed all through the Christmas, sort of that 36-hour period of a little bit before Christmas Day and a little bit of after Christmas Day. And that is sort of um, the Trump doctrine was on full display, right? If you're looking for a consistent moral compass in American foreign policy right now, you're not just looking in the wrong place. You're looking at a map that's been rewritten by a Sharpie. And if you want to understand what I mean by that, don't start with this national security strategy, which I've already explained in detail a few episodes ago. Don't start with a Pentagon briefing. Instead, you have to start with the Truth Social feed of Donald Trump's on Christmas Day, because over that 36-hour stretch, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the morning after, you actually could see the entire Trump second term worldview play out in real time. There were holiday greetings, there were religious proclamations, there were threats, there were missile strikes, there were deportation talks, ominous warnings that sounded more like a mob boss than a head of state. And it wasn't chaos, it wasn't doctrine. It was just simply doctrine. It was not chaos. So let's walk through it all. So in the 24 hours before Christmas, Donald Trump was already setting the tone. He's doing the NORAD Santa calls, right? The simplest thing you're supposed to do as president, having a little fun with NORAD. Is Santa, are we tracking Santa around the globe? But even there, he's warning about, quote, bad Santas infiltrating the country. Border rhetoric wrapped in tinsel. By the way, it sounds like Donald Trump is a fan of my single favorite Cheech and Chong record that I owned on 45, and that was his Tale of Santa Claus, uh, uh, where he's stopped by Border Patrol. Anyway, it is, if you've never heard Cheech and Chong and Santa Claus, please, it's Cheech telling the story of Santa Claus to Chong. It's amazing. It's fantastic. And I used to have it memorized at the age of 8. Don't judge my parents. Um, so he's talking about bad Santa. Then comes the now famous post-wishing Merry Christmas to the, of course, radical left scum. So he always wants to attack fellow human beings, call them scum if they politically don't agree with him. Again, pretty much the worst attribute any U.S. president could have, particularly this one. Then, of course, there's the attacks on the media, the threats to review broadcast licenses, because he was mad. Because, again, he's lonely and he has nothing to do but watch television, watch late night television. He gets mad and they're making jokes at his expense and he feels isolated. All of this was before Christmas dinner. And then on Christmas Day itself, it escalated. Early Christmas morning, the president announces that there are U.S. military strikes in Nigeria, and he's described them as, quote, powerful and deadly against the ISIS-affiliated militants. Now, obviously, it was very important for him to create legal justification by claiming this was ISIS-affiliated militants. Okay, but do listen carefully to the language. This wasn't about counterterrorism capacity. It wasn't even about Nigerian sovereignty, and it wasn't even about regional stability. It was simply about religion. The president framed the strikes as a defense of Christians from what he calls slaughter. He literally wishes a Merry Christmas to, quote, the dead terrorists. That's not policy language. That's civilization language. Okay. And in Nigeria, America isn't acting like a strategic partner. It's acting like a moral avenger. He literally thinks of this as part of the Crusades. This is the first pillar of the Trump doctrine, religious identity as a justification for force. And notice something important. This only works where the U.S. can act unilaterally, not against non-state actors with no risk of escalation. That, of course, matters here. It's really great when you get a sponsor that you already use. And guess what? Quince is something that in the Todd household we already go to. Why do we go to Quince? Because it's a place you go where you can get some really nice clothes without the really expensive prices. And one of the things I've been going through is I've transitioned from being Mr. Coat and Tie guy to wanting a little more casual, but to look nice doing it, is I've become Mr. Quarter Zip guy. Well, guess what? Guess who's got amazing amounts of quarter zips? It is Quince. I have gotten quite a few already from there. The stuff's really nice. I mean, look, they have Mongolian cashmere sweaters for $50. I just know, hey, cashmere, that's pretty good. You don't normally get that for $50 or less. Italian wool coats that look and feel like designer. The stuff, I'll be honest, right? You look at it online, you think, okay, is this really as nice as it looks? Well, when I got it, I was like, oh, this is real quality. So yeah, I'm going to end up making sure I take it to my dry cleaner so I don't screw it up when I clean it. But I've been quite impressed. And hey, it's holiday season. It is impossible to shop For us middle-aged men, I know this. Well, tell your kids, tell your spouses, tell your partners, try Quince. Or if you're trying to figure out what to get, your adult child, what to get your mom or dad, I'm telling you, you're going to find something that is going to be comfortable for them on Quince. So get your wardrobe sorted and your gift list handled with Quince. Don't wait. Go to quince.com/Chuck for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada as well. That's QUINCE.com/Chuck. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Chuck. Use that code. Now let's move to Venezuela and the Western Hemisphere. In Venezuela, the language changes completely when he talks about it. Here, it's not about faith. It's not about human rights. It's about ownership. That's why the Monroe Doctrine gets talked about quite a bit when trying to understand his motivation with Venezuela. The president boasts about a massive naval presence. He calls it an armada. He talks about oil that was, quote, stolen, about assets that must be returned. This isn't democracy promotion, although I could argue that's the better justification for Venezuela, but he never talks about that. This is repo man diplomacy, if you will. He sees himself as basically the thug helping the American oil companies. The U.S. is acting less like a guarantor of regional stability and more like a collection agency with aircraft carriers. That's pillar number 2. Resources justify coercion. And here's the key distinction. In Venezuela, strength means seizing. In Nigeria, strength means striking. It's different language. It's the same logic. Now let's move to Ukraine, right? He's going to be meeting this week, and we'll see if something happens. I'm skeptical, which is why I don't want to make a huge deal over the meeting at Mar-a-Lago between Zelensky and Trump. But we see that Zelensky is at least trying to keep Trump from striking, essentially some sort of compact with Russia and essentially leaving Ukraine on their own. So let's compare both of Nigeria and Venezuela to the Ukraine situation, because this is where the moral code completely disappears. In Ukraine, the rhetoric isn't about civilization, not at least from Trump's point of view. It isn't about resources, at least not up front. It's about ending the bloodshed, which sounds noble until you look at the mechanics. Military aid paused, intelligence sharing throttled, then the pressure is applied not to the invader, but to the person, to the entity that was invaded. And what's quietly folded into this so-called peace plan? A minerals deal that benefits only the United States: lithium, titanium, uranium. So Ukraine's sovereignty is simply collateral. This is pillar number 3. Negotiating leverage beats moral clarity. So in Nigeria, we fire missiles. In Venezuela, we blockade ports. In Ukraine, we walk away and call it strength. So the question is, how inconsistent is all of this? Is it inconsistency, or is it simply a system? Because there are many critics. On one hand, you look at this and you say, this is not coherent at all. It's completely incoherent. But it depends on how you look at how Trump views things. And if you look at it through the umbrella of selective transactionalism, well, then it all starts to work together. Military force is used when the enemy fits a domestic political narrative. Christians for the evangelical base, migrants when it comes to Venezuela. The cost is low, right? Venezuela is not really attacking the United States. Neither is Nigeria. And the leverage is total. When those conditions don't exist, like confronting Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping, the moral language just completely vanishes. That's why there are no missile strikes over the Uyghurs in China. Right? What's the difference between protecting that religious minority versus what the persecution of Muslims in Western China versus the persecution of Christians in Nigeria? That's why Myanmar gets ignored. Again, same thing, religious minorities. Essentially a genocide. That's why Ukraine gets a spreadsheet instead of a shield, right? So the question is, what kind of long-term change does this create with America's relationship with the world? I personally think this is damaging us for a generation, and it's going to take us a generation to win back enough allies to restore freedom and democracy around the world. Okay? And you can call me an expansionist all you want. Yeah, I'm pro-democracy and pro-freedom. I know that every civilization, every tribe will take a different path to get there. But ultimately, I believe in what was written in the Declaration of Independence, that we have inalienable rights. So, what do our allies see in all this? Well, here's the part that I think matters the most. This isn't changing American foreign policy, but it is changing how America is perceived. In Europe, leaders no longer are whispering about this issue anymore. They're openly talking about what's called strategic autonomy. Translation, we don't trust Washington, and we can't trust America anymore. Some that are very much in the isolationist wing say, good, Europe should pay for their own security. America shouldn't be doing it. To this, I'm always ready to respond with, okay, I get it. You don't want America to be the world's beat cop. But you do know somebody's going to be the world's beat cop. You really want Putin and Xi to decide who the beat cop is? Or do you want the United States to decide? But let me put a pin in that. In Nigeria, officials are scrambling to have to walk back the religious framing because they're now turning a counterterrorism operation, which legit counterterrorism. This is radical extremism. This isn't about some crusade fight between the Christians and Muslims, although I do think the president's trying to appease a small group of people in this country who do see it as this. But they're turning this, when you turn a counterterrorism operation into a, quote, religious crusade, what Nigerians fear is that this is going to put a target on their own citizens. Because if you start to justify killing via God rather than sort of via the actual humans living on this planet, that is how you get more bloodshed. And that's how you get no remorse with that bloodshed. In Latin America, governments that dislike Maduro are alarmed at America's behavior because if oil seizures become precedent, then any resource-rich country in Latin America could be next. America isn't being seen as unreliable. It's simply being seen as transactional, frankly, no different than China. And if we're going to behave the exact same way China does, which is essentially transactional, pure and simple, then don't be surprised when people that used to be our allies say, maybe I'll get a better deal from China. That's kind of a problem, don't you think? Which leads me to what I believe is a brand problem now. So for 75 years, rightly or wrongly, America sold one idea. We sold the idea that borders matter, that sovereignty matters. And look what we did to defend the sovereignty of Kuwait. Successfully, mind you. Force is constrained by an accepted set of rules. Now the rule is simple. What's in it for us, and can we enforce it? That's not leadership. It's essentially portfolio management, right? He sees himself as the head of a private equity fund who's just trying to make that fund more financially bigger, wealthier, etc. And here's the dangers. If allies don't want to be our customers, they're going to shop around. Hello, Beijing. And if credibility becomes conditional, partnerships will become extraordinarily temporary. So in a world with Moscow and Beijing, this is, again, Putin's worldview is everything's transactional. There is no moral clarity. There is no, democracy's bullshit as far as Putin's concerned. And if we accept his worldview, which Donald Trump does, this is the huge problem. And so does Xi. And that's why he gravitates. That's why he won't confront when they violate norms, but he will confront anybody else who's, quote, smaller than the United States when they do. I think it leaves us very vulnerable. So here's the problem. Trump might get a few short-term wins here. Hey, look, he protected a handful of Christians in Nigeria, maybe. Maybe he took out ISIS, or maybe he just radicalized religious extremists even more in Nigeria. Seizing a tanker. Okay. You're going to create regime change in Venezuela? Are we going to manage that? Or are we just going to walk away and let the chips fall where they may? Not managing dictatorships that fall and helping with it leads to some really bad outcomes. See my ToddCast time machine segments on the Ottoman Empire and the fall of the Soviet Union. Basically, another empire. But you can lose the one asset. We are losing the one asset that mattered a lot. And it's frankly an asset we talk about in my fight to restore uh, legitimacy in media, and that is trust. And once trust is gone, no amount of missiles, minerals, or holiday posts can buy it back. We're not leading the world right now. We're negotiating it one transaction at a time. And that's an extraordinarily risky thing for us to do. And we ignore Trump's crazy on his social media posts because we think, he's all bark, very little bite. But the bites he does do, and I agree the bites are smaller than you think, but the bites that he does do sets us back, sets us back on trust around the world, just like he has done. He wants to any institution that has ever been legitimate, he tries to delegitimize. He did it with NATO. He's done it with mainstream media. He does it in so many aspects, does it with the rule of law. He just, he is in some ways, like I said, a wannabe TV. I've called him this before, a wannabe TV mobster. Real mobsters are sort of smaller and pettier and not as glamorous as Trump builds them up in his head. But Trump is a creature of fiction, right? He is not his ideal is something he saw in a movie or on a television show. It's not something that's actually existed, right? This has always been the disconnect between the Donald Trump version of America and the actual version of America. What the America he wants to make great again is the one he saw via John Wayne films, right? It's not the America that actually existed in the 50s and 60s. And so it is a bit of a fantasy, and it's just like what kind of leader he wants to be. He admires guys like John Gotti, an actual mobster, but he also admires people like Putin. He does admire people like Tony Soprano, a fictional mobster, because of the total and complete control they had. And that's ultimately, it's clear whatever it is that he's never had in his life, he keeps looking for something to have more control, to be in charge, to be venerated, to be respected, whatever it is. And in some ways, I've always said, lucky for us, he's still looking for some sort of human acknowledgement of his existence, which in some ways may explain why he behaves the way he behaves, right? He is desperate for affection. I've seen it myself when I compared him to FDR. I didn't compare him positively or negatively. I just compared him factually. He saw it as a positive because that's what he wants. He wants to be seen as bigger than the moment. He wants to be seen as somebody who we're all stuck learning about in history, whether we like it or not. And in some ways, he thinks great people, your greatness is measured by how much impact you have, regardless of whether that impact is positive or negative. I really, truly, and this to me has always been the warning sign. You know, it does. I mean, it's alarming what we may end up doing with Ukraine. Now, I'm pretty confident the unintended consequence of this isolationist foreign policy that this sort of transactional, semi-isolationist foreign policy, sort of anti-Europe, is that it's going to strengthen Europe and it's going to make the European Union an actual competitor to us economically. It's going to strengthen Europe's involvement in NATO in such a way that we may miss the influence we once had. So I do think and that's the thing, right? There's always unintended consequences that develop when we try to engineer the world through our prism, and we want everybody to see things absolutely through the prism of how he wants to make things. Everybody else gets a say in this too. And while it looks like there's no consistency into this foreign policy, we are starting to see a consistency. He picks on smaller entities to try to make a point. He ultimately sees things as, like he did with the Iraqi oil. He still to this day believes that oil belongs to America since we helped liberate Iraq, that should be the price. Everything is a transaction, which is the exact worldview that Vladimir Putin has been preaching since he took office at the start of this 21st century. Having good life insurance is incredibly important. I know from personal experience. I was 16 when my father passed away. We didn't have any money. He didn't leave us in the best shape. My mother, single mother now, widow, myself, 16, trying to figure out how am I going to pay for college. And lo and behold, my dad had one life insurance policy that we found. It wasn't a lot, but it was important at the time. And it's why I was able to go to college. Little did he know how important that would be in that moment. Well, guess what? That's why I am here to tell you about Ethos Life. They can provide you with peace of mind knowing your family is protected, even if the worst comes to pass. Ethos is an online platform that makes getting life insurance fast and easy, all designed to protect your family's future in minutes, not months. There's no complicated process, and it's 100% online. There's no medical exam required. You just answer a few health questions online. You can get a quote in as little as 10 minutes, and you can get same-day coverage without ever leaving your home. You can get up to $3 million in coverage, and some policies start as low as $2 a day. That would be billed monthly. As of March 2025, Business Insider named Ethos the #1 no medical exam instant life insurance provider. So protect your family with life insurance from Ethos. Get your free quote at ethos.com/Chuck. So again, that's ethos.com/Chuck. Application times may vary, and the rates themselves may vary as well. But trust me, life insurance is something you should really think about, especially if you've got a growing family.